The night Nimra accepted someone else's confession, everyone expected me to lose control. They thought I'd storm in, make a scene, beg her to reconsider, maybe even throw a punch at the guy she chose over me, but I never showed up. Because while the entire campus was watching her fall into someone else's arms, I was lying in her best friend's bed, my fingers tangled in her hair, my lips brushing against her neck, drowning in a reality that felt both vengeful and inevitable. I had spent years chasing after Nimra, believing that we were destined for each other, that no matter how many times she pushed me away, she'd eventually turn around and realize that I was the one who had always been there. But the moment I saw her smiling at another man, gripping his hand like he was her entire world, something inside me broke, and when I reached for my phone, my hands shaking, I didn't dial Nimra's number. I called her instead, the person I had overlooked all along, the one who had been watching from the shadows. And when she whispered, "Come over," I didn't hesitate. I was never supposed to be the kind of guy who got played. At least, that's what I had always told myself. My name is Michael, and for the longest time, my world revolved around one person, Nimra. She wasn't just my best friend, she was my everything. We had grown up together, gone through every major milestone side by side. We weren't just close, we were inseparable. Everyone knew it, or at least, that's what I thought. It wasn't that Nimra ever promised me anything. She never outright said we'd be together, but there were fleeting moments that made me believe she felt the same way. The way she'd rest her head on my shoulder when she was exhausted. The way she'd grab my hand absent-mindedly when we crossed the street. The way she'd lean in a little too close when she laughed, her perfume lingering in the air between us. I lived for those moments. But what I failed to notice was that while I was busy worshipping the ground, Nimra walked on. She was never truly looking at me the way I looked at her. She had always been the center of attention. Beautiful, confident, the kind of girl who walked into a room and instantly owned it. And me, I was the one in the background, the one people associated with her but never really noticed on my own. Yet, I didn't care. Because as long as Nimra was in my life, that was enough. Or so I thought. Then came Asen, the new guy. Tall, athletic, effortlessly charming. From the moment he transferred to our university, he had every girl's attention, including Nimra's. At first, I didn't think much of it. Nimra always had admirers, and she never paid them any serious attention. But something was different this time. The way she laughed at his jokes, the way her eyes lingered on him, longer than necessary, the way she started canceling on me last minute, because she had other plans. I didn't want to believe it. I refused to believe it. Then, one evening, I overheard something that shattered every illusion I had been clinging to. "She's going to say yes," one of Nimra's friends whispered excitedly. "Hassan's confessing to her tonight, and she's finally accepting." I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I had spent years standing by her side, waiting, hoping, believing that we were meant to be, and in the end, she had never even considered me an option. I should have confronted her. I should have asked her why. I should have done something. But instead, I walked away. For the first time, I didn't go running to Nimra. I didn't call her. I didn't try to stop it. I went somewhere else, to someone else. Someone who had always been there, silently watching. Someone I had never noticed until now. I didn't go to the confession. I didn't stand there in the crowd, watching Nimra hold Hassan's hand, smiling as if I had never mattered. I didn't fight for her. Instead, I found myself in a dimly lit apartment, standing in front of the one person I had never truly seen before, Sarah, Nimra's best friend. She opened the door with a cautious expression, her dark eyes scanning my face as if she could read every emotion I was trying to suppress. For years, Sarah had been nothing more than a background character in my life, someone who existed in Nimra's orbit, but never in mine. She was quieter than Nimra, more reserved, always watching, but never interfering. But tonight, she wasn't. Just an afterthought. She was the only person I wanted to see. Michael. Her voice was laced with confusion. Why are you here? I didn't answer. I just stared at her, feeling the weight of everything crash down on me at once. She must have seen it in my eyes, the pain, the betrayal, the silent plea for someone to understand, because she didn't push me away. Instead, she stepped aside, letting me in. The moment the door closed behind me, the reality of the situation hit me like a tidal wave. I had spent years chasing a girl who never wanted me, only to end up here, in the presence of someone who had always been standing on the sidelines. I heard about Nimra, I finally said, my voice rough, unfamiliar even to myself. Sarah didn't look surprised. She simply nodded, walking toward a couch and sitting down, her posture tense. Yeah, I figured you would. I laughed bitterly, running a hand through my hair. Did you know that she liked Osen? Sarah hesitated, and that slight pause was enough to tell me everything. She had known, of course, she had known. Nimra told her everything. She didn't want to hurt you, Sarah said, quietly. I scoffed. Right? Because lying to me for years was so much better. Sarah sighed, shaking her head. Michael, you've been in love with her for as long as I've known you. But Nimra, she never saw you that way. I think you knew that. Deep down, her words stung, but I couldn't deny them. Maybe I had known. Maybe I had just been too afraid to accept it. I dropped onto the couch beside her, exhaling slowly. The silence between us stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then, Sarah did something unexpected. She reached for my hand. It was a simple gesture, nothing dramatic, nothing over the top, just warmth, just comfort. And for the first time that night, I didn't feel alone. I turned my head to look at her, really look at her. Her features were softer in the low light, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite decipher. Why are you here, Michael? She asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard. I don't know, I admitted. That was the truth. I didn't know why I had come here. Maybe it was because I couldn't face the reality of Nimra choosing someone else. Maybe it was because I needed someone to remind me that I still mattered. Or maybe it was because, deep down, I had been blind for too long. Sarah squeezed my hand gently, offering me an understanding smile. It's okay not to know. And somehow, that was exactly what I needed to hear. Because, for the first time in years, I wasn't chasing after something that was never meant to be mine. I was just existing, and it felt strangely okay. The night felt heavier than usual, the silence pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake off. I sat on Sarah's couch, staring at my hands, the reality of everything settling into my bones. Nimra was gone, not in the physical sense. She was probably out celebrating with Osen, laughing like tonight was just another milestone in her perfect life. But to me, she had vanished, like a mirage I had been chasing for years, only to realize it was never real to begin with. I should have felt angry. I should have been furious that she had strung me along for so long, that she had let me believe there was a possibility, no matter how small, that we could be something more. But the worst part, she hadn't done anything wrong. She never told me she loved me. She never promised me anything. It was all in my head. The realization made my stomach churn, a nauseating mixture of regret, shame, and self-loathing. How could I have been so blind? How could I have wasted so many years on someone who never even looked back? Beside me, Sarah shifted, her presence grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. She wasn't speaking, wasn't prying, just sitting there existing alongside my turmoil. And somehow, that made it worse, because for the first time, I wasn't alone in my pain, and I didn't know how to handle it. Do you regret coming here? Sarah finally asked, her voice careful, as if she was afraid of the answer. I exhaled slowly, leaning back against the couch, my head tilting up toward the ceiling. No, I admitted, I don't. That was the truth. If I had gone to the confession, if I had watched Nimra fall into Asan's arms, I would have broken. I would have done something reckless, something stupid. Maybe I would have confronted her, made a scene. Maybe I would have begged. But instead, I was here with Sarah, and I didn't know why that felt right. She studied me, her dark eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. "You're allowed to be upset, Michael," she said softly. "You're allowed to feel hurt." I let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, and what am I supposed to do with that?" She hesitated before answering. "Let it hurt." Her words caught me off guard, knocking the breath from my lungs. Let it hurt. I had spent so long trying to not feel the pain, trying to convince myself that if I just waited a little longer, if I just loved Nimra enough, it would all work out. But it hadn't, and now I had to sit with it. I rubbed a hand over my face, exhaustion settling into my bones. "You knew, didn't you?" I finally asked. "That she never felt the same way?" Sarah sighed, pulling her legs up onto the couch, hugging her knees. "Yeah," she admitted. "I knew." I turned to her, bitterness curling in my chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked down, hesitating. "Because it wasn't my place. You wouldn't have listened." I opened my mouth to argue, but I stopped. Because she was right. If she had told me, I would have brushed it off. I would have convinced myself that Sarah didn't understand, that Nimra just needed time, that I just had to wait, and that was the problem. I had built my entire world around waiting for someone who never even saw me. A sharp sting burned the back of my throat, but I swallowed it down, refusing to let it win. "You deserved better," Sarah said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. I turned to her, something in my chest twisting painfully. "Then why do I feel like I deserved this?" Her brows furrowed, and for the first time that night, frustration flickered across her face. "Because you loved the wrong person," she said, shaking her head. "And when you love the wrong person for too long, you start thinking that love is supposed to hurt." I swallowed hard, her words slicing through me like a knife. Because she was right. I had spent years believing that love was supposed to be painful. That longing for someone who didn't love me back was normal. But it wasn't single quotes too. Love wasn't supposed to feel like this. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, my hands clasped together. The room felt too small, too suffocating, my emotions pressing against my ribs like they were trying to escape. "I don't know how to stop loving her," I admitted, my voice barely audible. Sarah exhaled, and for the first time, she reached out and held my hand. The touch was light, barely there, but it was real. "You don't have to stop," she said gently. "You just have to learn how to let go." I looked down at our hands, my breath hitching slightly. Let go. It sounded so simple. So why did it feel like the hardest thing in the world? For the next few days, I tried to avoid Nimra, not because I hated her, but because I didn't trust myself around her. The moment I saw her, I knew all those unspoken emotions, all those years of waiting, would come crashing down like a wave determined to drown me. But fate had a cruel sense of humor. I was walking across campus, my headphones in, trying to lose myself in anything other than my thoughts, when I heard my name, Michael. I stopped, my entire body tensed, before I turned around. And there she was, Nimra, looking the same as always, beautiful, confident, standing there like she still had a claim on me, like she hadn't just destroyed my entire world a few nights ago. I forced a smile, even though my chest felt like it was caving in. "Hey." She tilted her head, studying me. "You didn't answer my calls." I raised a brow. Didn't think I needed to. Her lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to say that, as if she thought I'd still be waiting at her feet, desperate for any attention she threw my way. I hated that she still had this effect on me. "Michael," she started softly, stepping closer. "I don't want things to be weird between us. I let out a humorless laugh. Weird, Nimra. You knew how I felt about you. You knew, and you still chose Asen, without even telling me. You let me find out from other people. She sighed. I didn't want to hurt you. That was the excuse everyone gave when they did something selfish. I clenched my jaw. Yeah, well, you did? Silence stretched between us, thick with everything we weren't saying. Then she spoke again, her voice quieter. I miss you. The words slammed into me like a punch to the gut. I blinked at her, my mind struggling to process what she had just said. You miss me, I repeated, my voice rough. She nodded, biting her lip. Things feel different without you around. I don't know. I just thought we'd always have each other, no matter what. Something inside me cracked. She wasn't saying she loved me. She wasn't saying she made a mistake. She just wanted me there like a safety net, like a backup plan. I opened my mouth to respond when another voice cut through the air. Michael. I turned and there stood Sarah, and from the way her face had paled, I knew she had heard everything. Nimra glanced between us, her expression unreadable. But Sarah, she looked betrayed. Sarah, I took a step toward her, but she shook her head. I should have known, she murmured, her voice laced with something sharp. You're still stuck on her. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. It's not like that, isn't it? She shot back. Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like that. Nimra, still silent, watched the entire scene unfold. Sarah let out a bitter laugh. You said you were done chasing her, that you were finally letting go. But the moment she calls your name, you're right back where you started. That wasn't true. It wasn't. But my silence spoke louder than any words could. Sarah's lips pressed into a tight line. I should have known better, she whispered, more to herself than to me. And then, before I could stop her, she turned and walked away. I didn't chase after her, and maybe that was my biggest mistake. 4 days after Sarah walked away, I felt like I was drowning, not because of Nimra, but because of Sarah. It was strange, wasn't it? How the person I had never really noticed before suddenly became the only one I could think about. How her absence felt heavier than any rejection I had ever received from Nimra. Maybe because with Nimra, I always expected the pain. With Sarah, I didn't. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to go to her and explain, tell her that it wasn't what she thought, that I wasn't still in love with Nimra. But how could I, when I wasn't even sure if it was the truth? I avoided both of them after that. I didn't text Nimra. I didn't call Sarah. I buried myself in work, in classes, in anything that would keep my mind too occupied to think about the mess I had created. But then, Nimra showed up again. It was late. The sky was dark, the wind crisp. I was sitting outside the library, staring at my phone, debating whether or not to text Sarah when Nimra's voice broke through the silence. Michael. I stiffened. I wasn't in the mood for this. She walked over, sitting next to me like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't ruined me. I don't get it, she said, tilting her head. Why are you avoiding me? I let out a dry laugh. Are you serious? She sighed, tucking her hair behind her ear. You're my best friend, Michael. I never wanted to lose you. Best friend, I repeated bitterly. Right. She shifted closer, her voice softer. I told you, I miss you. I turned to her, studying her face, searching for something, anything that might tell me why she was doing this. You miss me, I echoed. Or do you just miss having me around to stroke your ego? Her brows furrowed. That's not fair. I shook my head. No. What's not fair is you acting like you didn't know how I felt. Like you didn't know that I spent years waiting for you. And then, the moment I try to move on, the moment I try to let go, you show up and pull me right back in. Her lips parted slightly, like she hadn't expected me to say that, but I wasn't done. I wasted so much time, Nimra, so much, and you never even looked at me. But the second you realize I might be slipping away, suddenly, You miss me. Her eyes darkened. That's not it is. I cut her off. You never wanted me. You just didn't want anyone else to have me. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in years, I saw guilt in Nimra's eyes. But it didn't matter anymore, because I didn't care. I stood up, exhaling deeply. I don't want to be in your shadow anymore, Nimra. I turned to walk away, but she grabbed my wrist. I froze, and then, she whispered something that shattered everything. She doesn't want you, Michael. I turned back, my heart hammering against my ribs. What? Nimra's gaze was unreadable. Sarah, she's not going to wait for you. Something inside me twisted. What the hell are you talking about? She exhaled. She told me. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. You spoke to her. She came to see me. Nimra nodded. She wanted to know if if there was still something. I swallowed hard. And what did you tell her? She hesitated. I told her the truth, that I care about you, that I don't want to lose you. Rage flared in my chest. That's not the truth, Nimra. That's manipulation. She lifted her chin. I only told her what she already knew. I took a step back, shaking my head. You wanted her to walk away? Nimra didn't deny it. And that was the moment I knew I was done. With her. With this game we had been playing for years. With all of it. I turned away without another word, my mind racing. If what Nimra said was true, I was already too late. I ran, straight to Sarah's apartment. I didn't think about what I would say. I didn't think about whether or not she would even listen. I just ran, and when I finally got there, breathless, my chest aching, I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I stepped back, frustration building. Where was she? And then, just as I was about to leave, I heard a voice behind me. Michael. I spun around. Then there she was. Sarah, standing in the dim glow of the streetlight, looking at me like she had already made up her mind. And from the look in her eyes, I knew it wasn't in my favor. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice tired. I swallowed, my throat dry. I needed to see you. She let out a humorless laugh. Now you do. I stepped forward. Sarah, please. She held up a hand, stopping me in my tracks. You don't get to do this, Michael. You don't get to come running to me every time Nimra breaks your heart. My breath hitched. That's not what this is. She shook her head. Isn't it? I stared at her, desperate, panicked. Sarah, I swear. But she just smiled, and it was the saddest thing I had ever seen. You don't love me, she said softly. You just love that I was there when she wasn't. I opened my mouth to protest, but nothing came out, because a part of me wasn't sure if she was wrong, and she saw it. She saw the hesitation, and that was all she needed. Goodbye, Michael. Then she turned and walked away. For the second time. I didn't chase after her, and this time, I knew I had lost her. 4 good days turned into weeks, and weeks blurred into months. Sarah was gone. Not physically, she still existed in the same world as me, breathing the same air, walking the same campus halls, but she wasn't there anymore. Not in my life, not in my orbit. And Nimra, she had moved on, at least, in the way that Nimra always did. She still sent occasional texts, still smiled at me when we passed by each other, but I didn't respond. I couldn't, because I had finally realized the truth. For years, I had let myself exist as someone's option, ever a priority, never enough. I had let love become pain, convinced that if I just endured it long enough, it would eventually turn into something beautiful. But love was never supposed to feel like this. It was supposed to be effortless, reciprocated, real, and I had ruined my only chance at that. I wanted to believe that if I gave it time, if I proved that I had truly changed, Sarah would come back, that she would see me the way I had begun to see her. But life didn't work that way. You don't get to hurt someone and expect them to wait for you. And Sarah, She had never been the kind of girl who waited. 1 year later, it had been a year since I last spoke to Sarah. A year of learning how to exist without Nimra, without the weight of old dreams dragging me down, without the delusion that love was meant to be chased rather than received. And in that time, I had changed. I no longer walked with the same restless energy, no longer searched for something that was never mine. I was lighter, freer, but I wasn't whole, because there were things that time couldn't fix. Wounds that didn't just disappear because you wanted them to. And when I saw Sarah again, I realized that some wounds weren't meant to be fixed at all. It was a cold autumn evening when I spotted her across the cafe. She was sitting by the window, her hair tucked behind her ear, her fingers wrapped around a coffee cup. She wasn't alone. The guy sitting across from her was unforgettable, dark-haired, dressed casually, but with the kind of easy confidence that told me he didn't need to chase anyone. And Sarah, she was laughing, not politely, not out of obligation, but genuinely. I had never seen her look at me like that. Not once. And that was when it truly hit me I had lost her, not just in the sense of distance or silence. I had lost the possibility of her, and yet, I smiled. For the first time in my life, I looked at someone I had hurt, someone I had wanted, someone who had walked away on. I felt nothing but peace, because she was happy, and that meant I had finally done something right. I turned away, stepping out into the crisp evening air, shoving my hands into my pockets. For the first time in years, there was no one left to chase, no one to wait for, just me, and strangely, that was enough.